Welcome everybody.
Howdy.
Really excited for this year, obviously. People are already ice fishing out there. I'm not. I've been deer hunting. I'm just getting ready to switch over. But this year I've been sitting kind of I've been actually sick for the past couple days, so I've been sitting there really wrapping my head around kind of my past, my fishing history, and like putting things together and doing some stuff. But today we're going to talk about specifically targeting trophy northern pike, and I've spent probably. Wait, I even did a sweet slides for us here. So I spent probably 30 years fishing, and I've always been passionate about catching pike. I'm a musician, so most of my days are free to ice fish. So I spent a lot of time, thousands and thousands of hours ice fishing. So no different than anybody out there passionate about ice fishing, just had a lot of time to sit and do it. So today I really want to just try to put, if anybody, does everybody know that this was about pike? Pretty much. All right, cool. I don't know how it works, so I really want to try to put you guys on, in the mindset of catching, trophy pike, your biggest pike of the year. Kind of go out with and then having the kind of the confidence to kind of put together a formula to kind of try to do that. Hopefully it works out for me too. So yeah, today we're going to talk about getting geared up, how to break down spots, choosing body of water, what's the right bait, for the certain times of year that we're fishing. And then when, where, and how to use the bait and everything. So we're on gear. All right. So basically, I'm a minimalist when it comes to setup. But things that I've really learned that make a huge difference in my presentation is I use fluorocarbon instead of steel leaders. It's not a lot of these, and that's Generally, I use fluorocarbon. A lot of times of the year, you can get away with using steel leaders, especially when you're ripping baits across fish and they don't really have a chance to see the bait or anything like that. But a lot of times, so you have to find the balance between, thick enough diameter line that they don't break your line, and then you want to have enough, mobility for your lure that you can, for your bait that you can present a natural bait. So half the time I use live bait, half the time I use dead bait. What's going on? So when I'm trying to target, my general line that I use is 17-pound fluorocarbon, and the trick to using light line is using small hooks. That's really the trick, because what happens with the bigger pike is your treble gets caught in the corner of your mouth, of their mouth. You've seen when you're landing the fish, you're not yanking or setting a hook. You're letting that fish run, and then you're just kind of pulling that fish in slow. And you'll always find that the mouth is closed, the hook's right in the corner of its mouth. So you basically want your hook to be as big enough as your bait is that you can get it through the, wherever you're going to set your bait, but most of the time it's in the dorsal, so you can get the hook to get through the back of the fish. I, for the past 2 years, have been using the Nero, which is literally, it's insane. I've showed my buddies how fast it cuts. My buddy Chad and I he'll have his ion, and literally they're like, he beat me once with the ion, but it's like literally like it's almost the same amount of time with the least amount of effort. So it's really an awesome auger. I use that because I'm kind of a minimalist. I want to bring a light sled. This thing's awesome, so I recommend that. And people always ask, well, what do you cut? What size auger do you get for pike? So again, I don't want to spend a lot of time, drilling holes too. So as long as it's not super cold, 7-inch auger. That pike you saw in the first picture, I pulled that out without any issue in a 7-inch auger. It was a 26-pound pike. So 7 inches, 8 inches, those augers are perfect. If it's super duper cold, you get a lot of freeze, your hole's shrinking. Obviously you use a 10, but you don't really have to. Another something that I really noticed is black line, so it doesn't reflect a lot of light. If you think about it, pike are predators, but they're also going to approach your bait. So say you have a dead bait, they're going to approach your bait and they're going to sit there and stare at it half the time before they hit it, or and if they're in a neutral feeding position and they just kind of roll up on it, they'll have time to study it. They have good eyesight, so they're going to see. That's why we use the fluorocarbon and the black line. It makes a huge difference. If you guys have the tan line or the green line, and you switch to the black line, you'll notice a difference. I've definitely spent hours and hours with guys with tan line and me with black line, and they're like, dude, what am I doing wrong? Got the same bait, same line, same. I was like, you got to change your line. Whatever, they see the light, especially in some of the clear Adirondack lakes. That's a huge tip. They're not, I don't think they have any of these upstairs. I think they're out of stock. Out of all the tip-ups that I used over the years, this is actually my favorite tip-up for pike. It holds a lot of line. It's really versatile. This covers the hole, so you don't, if you're fishing shallow, you don't get a ton of light reflection. It doesn't freeze as much, and it just pops up. And you got different settings on your tip-up for tension on your magnet, so you can make it harder to strike or less, but just loosening this, bringing it up and down. Hooks, like I said, it depends on the size of your bait. I'm a big believer in, I like to use, so there's 3 stages, early, mid, and late ice for us generally. So in general, the rule is early ice, live bait. Mid-season ice, I start switching over to dead bait, and I like to use the biggest bait that I can find, and natural bait obviously is always key. I stay extremely portable, so my sled has an auger, my fish finder, a rod bag, and my rods and my bait. So I don't do the whole shelter a lot of times because I just want to stay mobile. So that's how I roll with gear. So choosing your body of water. This is an interesting topic, and breaking down the water. It sounds silly, but I mean, like he's talking about the St. Lawrence. Obviously, we all know there's huge predators in the St. Lawrence. We know Sacandaga has huge predators. Some of the lakes up north also have some really big pike. So you got to do your homework on that. A lot of times, just check the internet, check your regions, because if you want to catch a giant fish, there's got to be giant fish to catch. So that's an obvious thing, but it's important to spend time where those trophy fish are. Obviously, if you're going to take a season. So this year, I'm dedicating, if I can get my head wrapped around it, fishing Sacandaga as much as I possibly can, because I want to try to best my personal best here this year. So,
thank you.
So using your internet to find spots that you want to try to approach. Then once you find the spot, using your Navionics, you can break down a lake pretty quick. So pike are generally, they're predators, so they like to hang on. So they like to hang on bars and structure where they can ambush bait. So you're looking at spots like sunken islands and then weed edges, weed lines. You're looking at on the main lake, you're looking at the deep weed lines, the inside weed lines early. And that also I have here water clarity. So the water clarity helps me to determine the depth that I'm going to fish, because basically you're looking for the foliage. That's obviously your main goal. So early season, first ice, the ecosystem's pretty fresh in shallow water because you don't have a ton of pressure on the lake. There's not a ton of guys going out on the lakes. So unless it's a super clear body of water, you want to fish shallow on the shallow side early on. In your first ice, you want to be in shallow spots. So the other thing you want to think about is combinations. You want to put together stuff like, if you have a spot on the lake where there is a sunken island with a sandbar in the middle of a bay, and the sandbar kind of runs to the island, and it runs to the shore. So you want to kind of pick spots that have combinations with some weeds. So you find these spots with multiple combinations of structure, and then start with those spots to kind of approach your tip-up setups. Fish on the shallow side of the bar. Put them on, put some tip-ups on the outside of the bar. Put something by the island. So you want to have multiple setups on different structure to try to find where these pike are basically feeding. You want to have, when you think about breaking it down, early ice, mid ice, and late ice, you really want to think shallow on the structure, early ice. Think live bait, early ice, And then when it comes to mid-season, what happens is a lot of the pike will school up in deeper water. And a lot of my success comes during the mid-season, kind of when the doldrums of ice fishing have set in. I like to fish deeper for pike, and I've caught them in as deep as 50 feet of water and as shallow as 2 feet. But a lot of that has to do with water clarity and the bait. So mid-season, you're looking at deeper water, and then late season, you're back to shallower water again as they start to feed up and prepare to spawn. Luckily for us, a lot of the ice is still good, and the season's still open, until March 15th. So we can still we can get into that late ice and target those big pike pre-spawn. The next, I have some maps here. So basically, so this is kind of like what I was talking about. So you have this is like a bay off. This is like a standard bay right here with a weed edge. And this would be like an early season spot right here that you would approach when you look at your map. You see here, there's multiple combinations. You got a rock point, you got a sunken island, you got deep water. This would be another spot that basically the year-round spot that you could kind of approach all three ways we were talking about. If you look at this spot right here, you can see it's 40 feet. It's basically like its own ecosystem. Like that's essentially like its own lake. So you would approach that like it's its own body of water, which is something you think about on your big lakes. Essentially, obviously, this would be the main lake. So spots like these like humps here on these breaks in the middle of nowhere generally don't produce a ton of fish, but if you're getting a lot of pressure on your lake, they're worth giving a shot as you kind of investigate. It's worth giving it a shot. But you're looking for combinations. So you're looking for, see this bar comes out here to this island, and you got some weeds back here, and you got some good depth. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking when you break out your map or when you're on your lake. That's kind of how you want to break it down. Definitely, when you're talking about mid-season, like I said, you're definitely going to find fish in deeper water. So you're going to take everything to the outside of what you were doing. So if your outside weed edge stops at 20 feet, that's where you're going to fish. If it stops at 30 feet, you're going to fish there. So those are some good ideas for breaking down lakes. You guys have any questions on that stuff? Different thoughts?
I just noticed, though, you have a red treble hook?
Yeah.
Okay. You use red?
I do. Yeah, so I'll use red with live bait. We'll talk more about bait, too. So, but yeah, so like... I say there's like three positions that pike or basically fish stay in, like a neutral position, a positive position, or a negative position when it comes to feeding. So the more aggressive, the more lively, obviously to try to get a reaction strike out of a pike. And then, but what happens is, so pike will travel, like what I wanted to talk about too, I forgot to, is like pike will travel like, they'll kind of cruise like a bar. Like if say you have like a big bay, and in the middle of the bay there's a 30-foot hump that runs outside the ridge, or a 20-foot hump that runs outside the ridge to the shore. They'll kind of travel that, like almost like like you can picture like a shark, just kind of cruising through the cover. Doesn't necessarily need to be super weedy. It just needs to be something that'll hold bait that they can kind of travel on. So those are different spots that you want to think about when you're fishing for pike. As far as bait, I was talking about live bait early, and then basically I switched to dead bait most of the time, and then talk about water clarity. That's something you want to talk about. So if you have really stained water, you want to try to set your rigs high in the water column, and you want to probably use more live bait when you have some stained water when you're fishing. The other thing that I didn't mention is river inlets and outlets, so we didn't talk about that. So I'm bouncing around, but so with inlets and outlets, those are really good spots early and late ice. Generally, really good spots. And so like here, you can see this outside weed line right here. that's basically where you'd set up pretty much early ice and late ice for those pike. Again, they're just gonna sit there waiting for bait. So any questions on how to target them?
Your dead bait.
Yeah.
That's something that you kill prior to hooking it on. Or
Yeah.
Something that you keep in the freezer.
Yeah. I mean, so when it comes to dead bait, fresh is better, right? So I feel like the fresher the dead bait you have, the better. So if you can catch the bait and kill it that day and use it, that's what you want. Obviously natural bait. I mean, big pike. If you're fishing the lake where you have, well, like Sacandaga, they eat walleye. You know what I mean? So I mean, the big suckers, the biggest bait you can possibly get, bigger than your tip ups can handle, and then you could figure out. You could clip a fin off, you could clip a tail off, and then I talk about big bait as it's the end all to catching big pike. But I will honestly say that early ice, medium shiners, alive, gold shiners, big shiners, anything alive, you'll catch a lot of your big pike if you can stand catching the pickerel and the smaller pike. A lot of times you'll catch those big pike early ice on that live bait, for sure.
So basically, you use the big bait to eliminate the small fish.
I use the big bait to limit the small fish, pretty much, and then I also obviously think that those big pike want a quick meal. Like mid season, for me, it's the easiest time to target the pike because they tend to generally school up on the feed. So it's kind of like that mid-February, if there was like a golden time to catch big pike, like for example on Lake George, it's like that February 15th to the end of that February month. You'll find that like you'll just really be able to key in on those pike on those weed beds because they start to school up. When it comes to bait, I grew up when we were younger. We just trapped our own bait, so we had the ability to put on biggest bait we can. Obviously, big pike love the natural foliage in your lake. So the biggest natural bait you have in your lake is what you want to use or try to get. And then if not that, obviously big giant suckers or big shiners are the biggest bait you can get.
Do you suspend them?
I do. So with dead bait, generally, again, water clarity is key. I think you have to think about water clarity when you're talking about catching pike. So pike are cruising, you want to give them a chance to see it. With that water clarity being bad, I think you want that bait higher. My rule is like when I fish a lot of the stained lakes like Paradox or Scroon or some of those lakes that are kind of they're it's not super clear, but they're a little in the shallower water they're a little stained. General rule is halfway down with live bait or dead bait. When it comes to Lake George, Lake George is such a clear, dynamic, clear lake, and you got to fish deeper. When you're fishing for those big pike, you have to be so finesse. You have to have such a clean, clear presentation. The bait has to look natural if it's dead, and I literally just want that thing sitting above the weed line, just above the weeds. And again, when I talk about, you guys are like, well, I'm fishing in St. Lawrence, or I'm fishing Sacandaga. We catch 30-pound pike. How am I going to catch that on a 17-pound? That's your call. But when it comes to catching numbers of fish, that's how I succeed is by using fluorocarbon. But again, I don't think it matters that much if you're in South Bay and they're basically smelling your bait, whether you have a steel leader or not. So that's obviously. That's up to your discretion when to use that approach. I don't even know what else I got here. Let's see. There we go.
Can you talk about landing a big pike? Like, when you got a monster on. Take us from like, okay, now you can see it down there.
Okay.
Some things to do and not to do.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I've lost it.
Yeah.
Don't put your hand in the hole.
Right. So that's awesome. Thank you. So.
You got one on.
17-pound test, the number 12 treble hook. You got a 12-inch bait on there, right? You go to your tip up, it's up. You walk to your hole. You look at your hole. The flag just went up. It took you a minute to get to your hole.
It's still taking the line.
And it's still just rolling.
Okay.
Just rolling.
Go from there.
I'm going to be honest with you. 99% of the time, that fish has already swallowed that whole entire bait. Like, unless it's really just not really feeding. But generally, that fish comes up and just goes, boom, sucks it right in. Like everybody, we grew up talking about like pike, how they would you know how they would turn the bait around like a lake trout, and they do one run and then a second run, and then you end up losing the fish. They're wrapped around a log somewhere, and it's over. So, in my experience, and you guys don't have to trust me, but within that first run, once that thing slows down, you're usually good to go. The general rule is obviously you're not trying to rip anything out of the lake. You just literally, with that small treble, you're just basically pulling hand over hand. You don't set the hook. You don't do anything. With fighting a fish with that light line, obviously it's all about just tension. Keep steady tension. Keep steady tension. If that fish starts running, just let it run. Let it run. Let it run. Steady tension. It's a little longer of a process. Obviously, when it gets to the hole, it's going to run again. That's when your pike always turns on. You're like, oh, that's a big pike. It felt like a perch at first. So then you're like, oh, okay. But just let it go. Be conscientious of your line. Be conscientious of your line getting caught with your swivel underneath the ice hole. Constantly look at your line. Try to use your gaff to kind of just slowly just keep your line down if you need to. Obviously, just try to have somebody helping you collect line. Or one thing that people don't do, and I never talk about, is just when you're pulling your line, make sure the wind is blowing your line away from your hole, not all over your feet and tripping you up and losing fish like that. Yeah. Just little things that you constantly do will help you to land the fish. If I am gonna gaff a fish, I'm gonna try to just get it in the snout and the top lip. Just be super sensitive to gaff it, because I throw them back. I'm gonna probably weigh it and throw it back. If it's too cold, I'll just throw it back. I'll try to just slide my hand underneath its plate there and just and get it out onto the ice and get it in the water. But that's basically it for you don't want to set the hook, you don't want to wait too long, and you don't want to horse it in, obviously. Any other questions while we're on this topic?
Do you have any experience using single hooks? Because I live over in New Hampshire. I fish the Connecticut River set.
You fish the river setbacks?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can't use quick strike rigs or beta treble.
Okay.
So I've been just experimenting with all kinds of stuff. I don't know if you had any experience with that.
I mean, I don't. The only experience I have, to be honest, is just like your occasional snelled hook when we were a kid, when we catch them on perch rigs, But I think with the small circle hooks, you should be good, You might have to up your line diameter a little bit, but I think you should be fine with those. You just want to have enough hook, after you bait it. Tricks for live bait that might entice a neutral fish into biting are just kind of cruel but effective. If you have like a shiner and you kind of blind it, you know what I mean? It'll get it going crazy. You clip a fin, but don't kill it. You know what I mean? Just clip a fin. If you got giant suckers and the tail fin you want to clip. So the question of dead bait, for me, dead bait is deadly effective late season. So how I rig dead bait, and you asked if I suspend it, all my dead bait just sits there like it's alive. So there's no sinkers on it, there's nothing on it. It's just basically sitting there suspended like it's a live fish, suspended in the water column, just an easy meal.
Slice it so the air sac is...
So I poke the air sac out with my hemostats or a hook or a needle or whatever you want to use, and I literally just push the air out of it. And I when I put my bait in the hole, if it's like this, no, I wait till it's just sitting there suspended, and I slowly drop it down so it doesn't loop up, and I get it down suspended so it's sitting there alive. Late season, in some of those lakes like Sacandaga, Scroon, or Paradox, and you get into these shallow bays, when you talk about those maps I was showing you before, I don't know how to go back, but some of those maps out where you're talking about the inside edges of these weed lines and these sandbars where these fish come in and spawn, dead bait can be it's just awesome.
I'm sorry, you said that you caught the swim bladder on the live bait?
No,
On
just
only
dead bait. Yeah,
Or salt or dead bait in case you don't have it.
I don't know. If I'm gonna keep dead bait, I'll just put it in water and freeze it. Yeah. I haven't had a ton of experience fishing super stained water. I don't have years of experience on like lakes like Lake Champlain. But in general, you could basically just salt your bait or soak your bait because I think they rely on smell a lot. So
They love mackerel on South Bay.
smell, the oily
Yeah, I was
smell.
gonna say,
yeah.
is there a point to like if you're using live or dead bait, smelting your bait? Is
Like,
that a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Smelt oil is awesome. Yeah, I've always had success with smelt oil, especially on Lake George or any of the lakes with smelt. And if you can catch smelt now, we can use them on Lake George, so that's awesome. But all your biggest fish are all eating the biggest foliage they can find, whether that could be walleye, that could be smelt, ciscoes, perch, whatever it is they can get their hands on in that lake.
Really, perch?
Yeah, they'll eat perch. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
especially Saratoga Lake. People are like, pike don't eat perch. They definitely do.
Really?
Yeah.
When you say big hook, how big is big?
Big hook for.
You said you're running big hooks, like the biggest hook you can run.
Oh no, I don't.
Size-wise.
I
You
don't. No,
You-
don't.
You're still
no.
using like the
Small hooks. So basically, if I had a minnow here, I would want like this is the hook. This is my rig right here for pike fishing. Of course, the hook's in the net, but I mean, I think that's a 12.
Yeah, I was gonna say 12 is what.
It's
you
probably a
said.
12.
Just
But-
one?
Just one treble, and then I found that when you use the sometimes you use the doubles, the quick sets and stuff, you end up causing yourself more trouble. Like they'll kind of leverage they'll get the mouth will be open, or they'll leverage the hook out of their mouth. It's just too much hook. This hook literally they're gonna swallow the bait, or they're gonna get the bait mostly down their throat. You're gonna pull on that fish, and this hook's gonna end up like 90% of the time right in the corner where there's no teeth of his mouth, just sitting right there. And it's basically the minimalist way to land those big fish, and to get more. You're gonna catch more fish by dropping down your presentation. Just you guarantee you'll catch a lot. You'll get a lot more flags.
I see that tip up has a little black thing. Is that to cover the hole?
Yeah.
Cover
Yep.
the light?
Keep the light out.
Yeah. It keeps the light out, covers the
Can we
hole.
talk about that? I came in kind of late.
No, I didn't actually. But I mean, covering the hole for pike is only going to matter if you're in really shallow water. So generally, but. And the thing is, yeah, it prevents it from freezing, which is also helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. This tip up to me is just kind of a really effective tip up for pike fishing because it's got a really nice spool. It's got a pretty good spring on it for tension. It's got a setting here where you can bring this magnet like right up against the other magnet, or you can back it off so it's super sensitive. And I just like the versatility of this tip up myself. It's not perfect, but when it comes down to all the tip up setups, there's always something you can find wrong with them. This one's probably, I am sponsored by HT, but this one's probably not made as rugged as a lot of the other tip ups. I had to like basically re-rig these tip ups to fit so right here you'll see there's black tape. There's like a plastic weld here and then if you got a cold weather and you just shake the tip up, it'll break there. So I just use this tape. I haven't had any issues ever since. Obviously I wish they were making a little better quality parts, but pretty versatile tip up.
Do you use split shot on your line for weight?
Yeah, so split shots only come into play for me when I'm using live bait.
Okay.
And that's generally just to create more action out of the bait, to kind of make it struggle. As you know, like each minnow has its own kind of thing it does, right? You get your emeralds and your smelt, and they want to be like up at the hole doing circles.
Yeah.
So you need to, it's a real art to kind of keep that live bait straight and your line not kinked up, right? So you got to spend a lot of time paying attention to how much weight you have, how far away your weight is from your smelt, so you get that action so it's not wrapping
Where
around.
do you normally run your bait? You run it above your weight.
So with like emeralds,
leader?
so like with emeralds or smelt or something like that, I'm gonna put just enough weight on it that fish can't really get around my line.
Okay.
And I'm only gonna want that like 6 to 8 inches above the bait.
Okay. So
Not
it's
too
on,
far.
So it's on your leader then.
It's on my leader line.
It's on
Yeah.
your leader line. Okay.
Otherwise, you're gonna end up every time with the smelt wrapped around your fishing line. You know.
How long of a leader?
So clear water. You want that leader as long as you can afford, 3 to 6 feet generally. of that 17-pound fluorocarbon. You can up it to 20, especially with dead bait. But if you have live bait, 17 is perfect because you're going to get the mobility and the natural mobility on the bait. It's just going to be nice to work, easy line to work with. And you want that. You want as much leader as you can afford. Lake George specifically, 6 feet. It's better. When that pike comes in and it approaches your rig, they have great eyes, so they could really just say, oh, something's not right, and just move on. Obviously, pike are ferocious, and when they're in an aggressive feeding pattern, I don't think it matters what you can have a hot dog down there on I don't think it matters. The ultimate goal is to put more, to be consistent about catching pike, and I think the real thought is when you approach these lakes that you don't always fish, how do you go out and kind of approach those lakes and target pike without really knowing, where to go? And I think a lot of it has to do with trying to break down those lakes, with the available time you have. So that's pretty key. But does anybody else have any questions that we could key in on?
One last question. When you go out and fish with dead bait, how do you kill the bait? Do you gut it? Do you slit it? What do you do?
So, makes me think of lake trout when you say gut it. So, so those big golden shiners that you catch, how like they're like their body's real hard, and a lot of times you can't get the air out of them. So sometimes you have to pop that open and make sure you can get the air out. With other bait, you just really want the air out of the bait. So however that is, you poke a hole in it, and that's it. Yeah. Another thing is the way we're set up here with this light line. You're going to catch more non-target species too, which is fun. You'll catch more lake trout that way, which is good. Let's see what else.
Have you ever ran dead bait on the bottom with slack?
No.
I've had good luck like that.
So like if you're fishing shallow, if you're fishing shallow with like a dead bait on the bottom, and you got a ton of weeds and your bait's in the weeds, that's junk. You know what I mean? So if you're in a sandbar and you're on like Sacandaga and there's a spawning there's a sandbar. So when I was talking about structure, it doesn't matter if there's weeds on it or not. But like Sacandaga is perfect. There's all these little sunken humps and islands out there with these like extended bars that end up, and it's all just sand. Those pike will literally follow those sandbars to those islands, just cruise around like big sharks. And in that kind of situation, a dead bait on a sandbar on the bottom, that's fine. I mean, but to me, also, pike mostly can see above them. You know what I mean? So you're giving yourself way more. Yeah, so you're giving yourself way more of a chance to catch them if you're running above them.
You have any experience with putting like Colorado spoons above your bait, live bait?
Yeah.
Because I've been messing around with that lately.
Yeah.
And it's been paying
I think
off.
it's super effective.
Yeah.
And I think it's super effective in stained water too.
Yeah.
Flasher.
Yeah, like a flasher or basically a Colorado spoon. Like he's basically saying like a spoon that you'd get on a spinnerbait, the round ones.
Okay.
So also red beads.
Yeah, beads and a
Colorado blade. So you're getting the knocking. That stuff's all gonna work great, especially if you. Another thing that you could think about, which I've talked about before, this is all stuff off of you guys, is working rattle baits around your tip-up setups to kind of attract pike in. So that also helps. Where were we though? You were talking about. Someone had a question.
The Colorado blades on the above the bait. How far above the bait do you put that?
So I mean, you want to run that a foot above the bait, and you want to use like he said. So you'd want to use like a swivel. Put the Colorado blade, set it up on the I forget the name of this style adapter for the blade. So you want to put that above it, put your bead underneath it, and your bead on above it, so you get that little bit of movement, and you're fine. That could be done not just with a Colorado blade. You could do that with like a flasher, like an old school flasher, like if you want to create some weight. All that stuff is really good for attracting big pike and stained water. But when it comes down to this finesse approach in clear water, big super clear water, I don't use any of that.
You ever
Um,
mess with any of those things that you drop down the hole, they create the bubbles that come up and all that?
I just saw that on Facebook the other day.
Yeah, me too.
I was like, huh.
I don't know.
I was like, huh. It's like it's like it,
activity, you know?
Waste of money.
has anybody seen that on Facebook? That air tab you throw in the water and it creates a bubbles and comes up? Is it a waste of money?
Alka-Seltzer.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It looks like Alka-Seltzer,
There's
yeah.
also, you can actually
Waste
put
$10.
foliage down a hole. You can actually buy foliage that drops down.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I don't know where that's all
It's
about
like
either.
plastic vine.
Yeah,
You just drop it down the
something you
hole.
put in your fish tank.
Yeah.
If you can attract bait fish with it, I'd say it would work. But
Right?
Supposedly that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Provide them shelter.
I mean,
Christmas trees.
Just more money.
he was asking about you were asking about time of day.
Oh yeah, what time of day do you fish?
Uh,
And where do you drive?
Obviously, first light, first light, last light, and then moon phase is just like everybody's all, you get the moon phase, the solar lunar charts, follow those if you don't have a lot of time.
Farmer's Almanac?
No, I don't use that one. But like, have you guys, anybody that spent a lot of time on the ice, a lot of fishermen, like a lot of ice time? You do? So like, you ever follow the moon charts when you're fishing? You ever see like a crescent moon during the day as it sets, as it rises? You see the moon during the day and it reaches its highest point. You ever notice your flags bing 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 when that happens? No. Check it out next time. Yeah.
Perch.
Yeah. Perch, anything. Your flags will just start flying. I think
What moon phase again?
just
Moon, you have to do that.
like when you have a crescent moon that rises during the day, morning, afternoon, whenever you see it rising, those you'll notice. So I believe the whatever it is, pressure change, whatever it is, barometric pressure, it works for sure. I think it works for deer, fish, everything. But so the bottom line is there's a fine line between spending all day long staring at your tip ups and catch a trophy pike. The bottom line is you got to put time in. That's the ultimate deal.
Fishing.
It's fishing, but the more time that you can get in on that, the better chances you are going to have to catch fish. But I can tell you this: when I go fishing at this point now, and I go out, it's not by mistake. I'll catch 6, 7, 8, pike every time I go that are all between 8 and 15 pounds. You know what I mean? So you can find these spots where these fish are, and then it's just like anything else. You gain access to spots where the foliage is there, where the fish are, where the pike are there, and you have your setups that are finesse enough that you can approach the pike without them being shying away from your bait. You're gonna catch more of the pike, and then you're gonna have more spots to fish. So the more spots that you approach, like I showed you on that map, if I knew how to go back, the more spots that you broke down and try to approach, the better off you are. Like if you look at Sacandaga is another like perfect example. You look at that lake and you'll see all the guys in like 3 or 4 spots, and the rest of the lake's just completely null and void of people. I don't believe that there aren't trophy pike all over that lake. It's just being brave enough to spend the time to put together this formula, which is basically leave it like this: multiple structure, weed beds, sandbar, points, outside weed edges, rock points, shelves. Put all those combinations together. Find 2 or 3 of those things in one spot. And look on the Navionics map, and you'll see it like plain as day. It takes you a minute to break down a lake. It shows everything right on the map. You say, oh, look at that bar. That hump runs out to that sandbar, or that whatever that is, a rock point, sunken island. Put all those combinations together and go try to set up on those spots. When you get to those spots, try above the island, try behind the island, try on that bar. Generally, you can't go wrong with a depth change, with a long structural depth change for those big pike. They'll be there. Don't be afraid to fish deep water mid-season.
How about a channel like man-made lake? You got the old riverbed going through it. Is that a good spot to target?
As long as you can find those multiple factors in that channel, something that stands out in that channel to hold the bait. Or if you generally have enough, I always go here and there's a ton of bait there, in the summer, and give it a shot. But I think you really just want to think about a pike as the kind of fish that's kind of has a big territory, cruising, or just cruising around looking for how to ambush big bait. So think about it like that when you're approaching these spots. When you're fishing in weeds, stay above them. Obviously, you don't need to be in the weeds, and then I think generally just put as much time as you can in on and you'll do good. But any other questions?
When you're hooking your shiners, you going through the dorsal fin?
Yeah.
Have you ever tried it on the side, parallel with the fish?
Yeah.
It throws them off balance every time they move, they flag.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. I've tried to, and then also, in the tail or in the head, depending on what the bait does. So, but that in the side of the bait is how a lot of guys do it for pike for sure. Yeah.
You mind shifting over to salmon fishing?
What's that?
You mind shifting over to your secrets on salmon fishing?
Sure. What do you want to know?
Well, how do you get them on Lake George all the time?
They're nomadic. I mean, this new breed of salmon that they have in there, the Sabico salmon, they're pretty neat. They're different than the salmon that we used to have on that lake. They're the way they hit baits. I'll just say this: the way they hit baits is really it's different than the old salmon. They kind of like a bait that's coming like a little lower in the water column. So
you're not running under the ice.
Not as far under the ice. You can afford dropping down a little further.
Are you still running shoals? Like, are you running along the edges?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, they're
I've
just...
seen you out.
Yeah.
Not binoculars or nothing. I'm like, I know he's over there catching salmon.
I mean...
Stealth mode.
Lake George is... Lake George is no... The salmon... The guy who does awesome for salmon in the summer is Joey Greco. He's doing a seminar here later.
Oh, okay.
He's the man. He wants... I think his seminar is going to be on general ice fishing, like kind of like a beginning, like getting started. But if you tap his ear about it in the summer, he's on it. In the wintertime, it's anybody's guess because they're so nomadic. They're just such cruisers that only luck I've ever had with salmon is I catch them right in the middle of the day at 12 o'clock, really good, or first light. And, I'm always, and I'm always just trying to find deep structure near deep water,
Talked about clipping fins.
Yeah.
Is that just a great smell or what?
Well, it's to create an erratic swim, and then also to keep your flag down, right? So that tail fin, if you have a 12-inch sucker, you drop that thing down and that plops, you're gonna pop your flag. So you're gonna have to kind of like wound that fish to where you keep them alive enough, but also you keep your flag down. Those magnetic tip-ups, these ones are really good because you can basically turn this and whale this all the way up so that it's directly against the magnet, which makes a pretty hard hard pop. With the old flags like we used to do, you bend it halfway down and just wrap it around halfway. Just also really fun way, which I didn't talk about. This is like the most simple design, but now you have all kinds of quick sets, for your rods. This is the simple Arctic Warrior, basically. I'll love to put a big bait on a rod, and that way I can fight the fish on the rod. So these Arctic Warrior dead stick tip up setups are pretty sweet for moving around for big pike.
You wouldn't use a jaw jacker or something like that, though.
I wouldn't. I actually haven't experienced jaw jackers. I've been fishing my whole life, and when they came out, I was like, boy, they'd be really cool for like trout and salmon or crappie. But I'm set. I'm like kind of like old dog when it comes to that right now.
Do you fish with flasher ever? You bring a fish finder out?
So my fish finder I don't use a flasher. I use sonar. I haven't been able to get wrapped around the red green little lines. I like to see the sonar picture. Just kind of how I grew up.
I hear you.
But it's a little delayed, but not much, like maybe a second. So just takes a minute to get used to it. You guys have more questions, don't you? What time is it? I don't even know.
10:17.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'll throw one at you. Have you ever scaled the fish down and let them scales trickle down the hole to create a hole?
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, but what ends up happening is I always get the pickerel to come all around my hole when I do that. Yeah, a lot of pickerel will come in.
Do you have any experience on Friends Lake?
Yeah.
I just got access to that.
Yeah, I have a lot of experience on
I want
Friends
to go
Lake.
there for northern.
Yeah, there's northerns in there, but again, like when I was talking about earlier, that lake doesn't generally. I mean, that your biggest northern you're gonna catch out of there on a regular basis like 8 pounds.
Oh, is it?
You know what I mean? That's the thing about these lakes. It's like go to those lakes where you're gonna catch those giants. You know. My best fish on Lake George, my best pike, and I don't know how many I've caught. I can't even tell you how many pike I've caught in my life on that lake. My best one is like just under 19 pounds. I can't best 20 on the lake. What? I don't even remember. But what I'm saying is, there's other spots I grew up on, like on Scroon Lake. We have gone out on Scroon Lake on a weekend and caught 23s. Me and my stepdad, you know, when I was like 12, catching 23-pound pike. You can go there to those lakes where those pike are and do it, and you can do that. You can literally do that. So you got to go to a lake where you can, if you really want to catch a trophy, you can catch them. Sacandaga, for sure. That lake is ridiculous. We have that fishery that we have right in our backyard. It's a hard lake to fish because it's man-made. There's not a lot of structure. There's not a lot going on. But what there is pretty easy to figure out, especially if you just literally think about what I just showed you there and break it down like that. It really limits your spots because it's a big, flat, barren water. So you can limit those spots by breaking that stuff down. You could literally catch a 40-pound pike
Have
out
you
of
ever
it.
fished lower down on Stewart's Pond?
No.
Like,
Is there any in there? I don't even know.
my uncles say they've caught fish down there, but I mean, I heard it's dangerous because there's
Oh, the lot of water.
moving
Yeah.
water under there.
Any other questions? I think we're good, right?
Very good.
Does that give you guys any inspiration on big pike this year, or what do you think?
For sure.
I mean, that's basically legit, like everything that I do to try to catch them. For there's nothing. I'm not holding off on anything there. Thank you guys. Depends on how hard they're going. Sometimes if you're really moving a little bit